Bitcoin Core has been running roughly 99% of all Bitcoin nodes over the last 15 years. 300,000 lines of code that almost no one fully understands, maintained by a shrinking pool of developers with an almost 90% attrition rate. And until very recently, there's been no real viable alternative. Is that a problem? I think so, and so do a lot of other people. And on a recent episode of Hard Money Dispatch, I sat down with two guys who are actually doing something about it. And in this video, I'm basically going to be giving a recap of all the important points from that podcast episode because I noticed that the video version didn't get that many views. So in case anybody missed it, I will link to that in the description here and give you an overview of the big points because this was a really important episode and I think more people need to hear about this. What's happening at the protocol level of Bitcoin isn't something that's discussed all that often beyond, outside of niche circles in the community. So I just wanted to put that out there. And the two people I talked with were Gil Roberts and Josh, aka Secure Sovereign, from the Bitcoin Commons project. Josh has a deep software development background, has been in Bitcoin since 2010, and has since devoted most of his time to this part of Bitcoin since recovering a life-changing amount of Bitcoin in 2024. And Gil brings a business and software development perspective. One key big starting point is that Bitcoin Core is like an informal oligarchy. Josh did a quantitative analysis of Bitcoin Core's governance, not just looking at opinions or narratives, looking at the facts when it came to how Bitcoin Core functions and who approves things. And he mentioned at one point that it comes down to about 3 people, that the majority of pull requests or suggestions to add things to the software came down to a very small handful of people. And his conclusion from all that is that Bitcoin Core is an informal oligarchy. He doesn't mean that in a pejorative way, but just as a natural consequence of how things have developed over 17 years. The code base is over 300,000 lines of what developers call spaghetti code, where consensus rules are entangled with all kinds of other things. You'd have to master 8 different disciplines to reliably change anything. And the result is a very small number of people on Earth who are competent enough to work on it. And even if you found those people, Bitcoin is severely underfunded compared to other projects. In 2023, for example, Bitcoin received about 8.4 million in funding, whereas Ethereum received around 50 million the same year, despite being worth far less. The developer attrition rate is close to 90%. Good coders come to Bitcoin, hit a governance wall, get dismissed, and then leave, and oftentimes go to something like Ethereum or Solana. And they rarely come back. That reputation spreads, and the pool of developers shrinks further. This can create a brain drain and a vicious cycle where Bitcoiners complain about the lack of review while inadvertently pushing out potential reviewers. You can't get supervisors and managers if the employees keep leaving, right? And there's no organizational learning because the people who learn things take that knowledge with them when they go. So what can be done about this? Well, until recently, the answer was basically nothing. Forking Core meant that you inherit all 300,000 lines of spaghetti code and 15 years of technical debt, but AI has changed that equation. And in almost every other open source community, forking is normal and healthy. If you look at Linux, for example, there's Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, Arch Linux, Kali. Red Hat employed thousands of people as a fork of Linux. But in Bitcoin, the term fork has been weaponized. This is something Gil brought up many times. Go fork yourself has become a dismissal rather than an invitation. The reason forking hasn't worked is that without a clear specification of what Bitcoin consensus actually is, you're stuck following Core. And as Josh put it, Core's code effectively is consensus. There's no separate document that says this is what makes Bitcoin Bitcoin. And if you compare that to the internet, there's no single piece of software that runs the entire internet. Cisco, different routers, different implementations, all operating on a shared specification, which is the HTTP protocol. And Bitcoin never had that until now. The block size wars of 2017 left some traumas in the community. The only outlet for disagreement was just getting personal, going on in these Twitter wars and stuff. There's no governance solution, no architectural alternative. People are understandably pretty wary of revisiting that kind of conflict. So the Bitcoin Commons team set out to solve this problem from the ground up. not by forking core, but by building something entirely new. Bitcoin Commons is a ground-up re-implementation of Bitcoin. It's 0% core code, but 100% Bitcoin, not an altcoin and not a fork of core. A completely new code base built from a mathematical specification of what Bitcoin consensus really is. Now, the way they did it was they used AI to analyze Core's spaghetti code and extract what is actually consensus into a mathematical proof. Not code per se, but math, which can be verified by mathematicians who don't even need to know how to code. Then they built a new implementation based on that math proof and ran differential testing, replaying the entire blockchain and checking every result against Core's behavior to make sure there are no divergences. That specification is machine readable, so it's not just a document sitting on a shelf, it's locked to the implementation. If you change the code, you have to update the math. If there's drift, it's immediately detected. And this is different from something like Ethereum's yellow paper, which has drifted away from the actual implementation over time and is not maintained. The whole project's free and open source. The intention is to release it to the community, not maintain control of it. And when it comes to AI's role, this wasn't even possible before the last year or two. No one in the previous 17 years of Bitcoin's history had the tools or the resources to do what AI can do now, which is chew through 300,000 lines of code and return a mathematical proof of what consensus is. Josh estimates he's at least 50 times more productive with AI than traditional development. Now, the big idea here is something called the module system. Bitcoin Commons uses a modular architecture. Instead of one monolithic code base, functionality is broken into separate pieces. And if you disagree with one aspect, you can fork that one piece instead of the entire thing. One real-world example would be the spam debate. That I've made videos on that in the past. If you want to filter non-monetary transactions aggressively, you can just download a filtering module that does that. If you want ordinals, you download the ordinals module. If you don't care either way, your node just ignores the whole thing, and you don't even know what's happening. Think of it kind of like internet routers. Some people block certain content because they have kids, others don't. Nobody goes to their neighbor's house and tells them they're a bad person for their settings. Both routers still work the same on the internet. That was an example that Gil brought up during the podcast. And this lets the free market determine outcomes instead of people getting wrapped up in all these Twitter wars. If your solution has purchase in the market, that's great. If it doesn't, then you lost. But no one had to fight a civil war over it. Another thing we talked about was the term use case has become a dirty word in Bitcoin, which is kind of absurd. Everything you do is a use case, as Gil put it. There are tons of use cases for Bitcoin as money, even with op return set to 0. The module system also makes Bitcoin more adaptable to threats. Imagine 5 different forks experimenting with quantum resistance. 3 might fail, 2 might survive, and the network just keeps evolving. Compare that to a 2-year civil war every time you want to implement a change, which is basically what we have now. Another key point is that this makes Bitcoin stronger. Multiple implementations only add to the security, because if one implementation accidentally introduces a bug, like the inflation bug in 2018, that went undetected for 8 months, which would have allowed anyone to print infinite Bitcoin, something like that will only affect a portion of the network running that software and not the entire thing. Different implementations can serve as checks against each other. If one starts drifting from consensus, the others sound the alarm. It takes pressure off core developers. They're human beings carrying the weight of a $1 trillion network. Having alternatives means they don't have to answer for everything related to Bitcoin. It also opens the door for serious capital. Venture capital isn't going to show up to clean up Bitcoin's mess. But if the infrastructure is modular, forkable, and investable, the ecosystem starts to look a lot more like Linux, which attracted enormous investment. Red Hat alone became a multi-billion-dollar company. Another thing Gil talked about was there's good ossification and there's bad ossification. Things that make Bitcoin orange, like 21 million cap on supply, the difficulty adjustment, the proof of work, those things should be locked down. But networking code that's 15 plus years old, or the 80-90% of code base that isn't consensus, that should be able to evolve and adapt. The wallet deletion bug that slipped through 2 pull requests and over 100 reviews is a perfect example of what happens when everything is entangled and untouchable. Where things stand right now with Bitcoin Commons, differential testing is complete. Deployment could happen very soon. Version 0.1 may already be released. This is early software. It's not made for fully making real Bitcoin transactions over it just yet. But they do want people to download it, test it, try to break it. They've already had their first outside contributors, people who aren't part of the founding team stepping up to participate. They're reaching out to university math departments to help verify the specification. And the long-term vision is to create a market for node implementations, not just one alternative. Again, think of it like Linux, not just another core competitor. You can find them at thebitcoincommons.org, their implementation at btcdecoded.org. You can find Josh's governance research at secsov.org, and you can find Gil Roberts' writing and media at gilroberts.net. So to bring it back to the big picture here, Bitcoin's greatest strength, its decentralization, is undermined when 99% of nodes run one piece of software controlled by a handful of people. The Bitcoin Commons project isn't an attack on core, it's more of an escape valve, a way to disagree architecturally instead of politically. If forking is normal in every other open source project on Earth, why should Bitcoin be the exception, especially now that we have the tools to do it right? That's a direct quote from Gil. So that's going to do it for this video. I know I got a little technical, but I hope you found value here. These things need to be talked about more, in my opinion, and it was great to have Gil and Josh on the podcast. If you're a Bitcoiner doing something interesting like that, reach out to me on social media, and maybe we can look at having you on the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter of Hard Money Dispatch. I'll leave a link in the description, and I'll see you next time.